Growing a Greener World is made possible in part by
We are dreamers, doers, builders, believers, and new pioneers. We are Kubota, proud sponsor of Growing a Greener World.
The 2018 Subaru Crosstrek. Built in a zero landfill plant, so you can roam the earth with a lighter footprint. Subaru, proud sponsor of Growing a Greener World.
and the following: the U.S. Composting Council, Milorganite, and Rainbird.
I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a Greener World, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. This is Bracken Cave, right outside of San Antonio. And right now we are staked out to witness one of Mother Nature's most incredible displays. Because about this time every night at sunset during the warmer months, 20 million bats emerge from that cave to begin their nightly hunt. It's the largest colony of bats in the entire world, so it's become a great tourist attraction and a boom to the local economy. But bats are critical to a healthy ecosystem. They're a great resource for farmers and home gardeners alike. But bats are highly threatened, often misunderstood, and greatly underappreciated by society at large. So our goal today is to give you a front row seat to one of Mother Nature's most incredible spectacles and have you looking at bats in a whole new light.
Bats are mammals. They're in the order Chiroptera, which means hand wing. So if you were to look at the bat real close, its wing looks just like your hand. There's a thumb up on top, real long fingers. You can even see their knuckles through their this thin skin around their fingers. They're about as big as your two thumbs together, with a 10-inch wingspan, so they're not very big. They weigh 15 grams, which is barely half an ounce, or next time you have 50 cents in your hand. That's how much one of these bats weigh. So they're not very big and don't weigh very much. So they're the only true flying mammal. Bats have belly buttons just like us. They're mammals.
But despite being in the same genetic class as humans, bats are often lumped in with animals like snakes and sharks as the creatures we fear the most. That is, until you have the chance to get up close and personal with them.
We're standing in front of Congress Avenue Bridge. We're in downtown Austin, Texas, and Congress Avenue runs from the south part of the town up to the Capitol. And the bridge that is right in front of the Capitol is full of millions of bats. When the bridge was first constructed, they used cast-in-place concrete to put the bridge in quickly, and it created these little spaces underneath the bridge that they didn't know created the perfect bat house.
Approximately 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats migrate north to Austin and call this one bridge home from March through October.
But the bats run all the way down. You can see even on the other side of the buttress, there's crevices that they're roosting in. Something else that's kind of interesting is see how there are no bats using the crevices immediately above this arch? It's because they don't have enough space to drop out. They need about 14 feet of space to drop out of the crevice and do their thing and get going. And they need that much space to get back up into the crevice, just the mechanics of flight for them.
And every single evening, they emerge en masse about 30 minutes before sunset, like clockwork.
So when the bats exit underneath the bridge, they do this beautiful flight where they swirl underneath the bridge and they gather up and then they exit like a school of fish to avoid predators. They fly downstream along the tree line out to the corn and cotton fields where they're primarily feeding on agricultural pests.
Over the years, the Congress Avenue bats have become a nightly local draw and a tourist attraction all their own. So, do you know how many bats are going to be coming out of this bridge tonight?
No.
It's 1.5 million. 1 to 1.5 million bats.
1.5 million.
1 to 1.5 million bats are on that bridge right now.
Oh my word.
Yeah. All right, so now how did you know to come here for this?
That was the number one thing people told us to do. My coworker said come my boss actually.
Win in Austin?
Yeah,
Come
go
watch
see the bats.
Did you have an opinion on bats before?
I love them. I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, and there was a little cave near our farm, and 2 little bats would come out every night and do circles around our barn, and that's all I really know about bats is I've seen 2.
No
so
way.
this sounds exciting to me.
Are you all here on vacation?
Yes, they are. Yeah,
You're the local bringing them in?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to take you to see bats.
Yes.
Yes. Oh no, I love bats.
So you were
She
game for
does.
it.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
I mean, what's not to like? They're flying mammals. Hello.
But there are plenty of misunderstandings that keep more of us from warming up to these amazing animals.
So there's a lot of myths about bats. Your grandmother probably told you tons of stories about bats. Some of them are a little true, most of them are not true at all. So bats are not blind, they see very well. They are not gonna get in your hair. All of those myths probably come from people walking through fields, kicking up insects, and the bats fly around, eat the insects. They're not gonna get stuck in your hair. They have tremendous navigation abilities. And plus, they're just not interested in your hair. Bats do have rabies. So that is one that's a little bit true. Not all bats get rabies, like you may have heard, but a small portion of every bat population tends to have rabies, just like every animal. Another myth that people like to talk about are vampire bats. Vampire bats are absolutely real. What's not real is that they don't actually suck your blood. They make a little incision, usually on chickens or other fowl, maybe cows, and they have an anticoagulant in their saliva, and they can lap the blood, and that anticoagulant keeps the wound open and flowing so they can come back for multiple blood meals. But they only occur in Mexico and Central America, and there are only 3 species, and they're really not very common.
The vast majority of the world's 1,300 bat species are really ecological superheroes. Just like birds and butterflies and bees, bats are huge pollinators of plants. And some tropical food crops like bananas and cocoa depend on bats for their pollination. And believe it or not, without bats, tequila wouldn't even exist because agave is a primary ingredient of tequila. And agave blooms at night in the desert Southwest. So it's primarily a huge food source for those bats that are flying around at night. They need that agave. But some big time producers of tequila are cutting down those stalks of the agave before they have a chance to go to flower to maximize their profits. But that's a problem for the bats because then they lose that food source. But some producers are being a little more responsible how they harvest and doing it in a sustainable way. So they're leaving behind some of those plants to go to flower, specifically so those bats have a food source along that migratory pathway. And then those producers are creating bat-friendly tequila that you can find in some specialty stores and restaurants and some bars like this one. So next time you want that happy hour and that bat-friendly margarita, it'll be there waiting for you. And it's also a surprisingly fun way of growing a greener world in the process. Thank you, Felix. Cheers.
Sure.
Bats may be good pollinators, but their real specialty is hunting insects.
Echolocation is this really cool feature that bats have, where they can emit a sound out of their mouth, it bounces off an object, and then it comes back, and it's received through a lot of their ears and other facial features that different bat species have. And they do this thing where they emit the sound sort of slow and repetitively as they're just navigating through their environment. But then when they hone in on an insect, they start emitting the sound faster and they increase the pitch and the frequency. So it kind of sounds like this: click, 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 click. And then when you hear that buzz at the end, they've gotten really close to the insect. They have this beautiful picture and they snatch that insect up on the wing while they're flying, and they eat it and then head out and look for more. But we know they can fly really fast, 50, 60 miles an hour, and we know they can go at least 30 to 50 miles in radius out to the corn and cotton fields to feed and then come back.
San Antonio is a hotspot for Texas tourists, thanks to its world-famous Riverwalk, amazing food, and historic Spanish missions, including the legendary Alamo. But some come for a trip to Bracken Cave, and to get an idea of just how much of an impact bats have on local agriculture, consider that somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million bats live inside this single cave just outside the city.
This colony eats about 147 tons of insects a night, and most of those insects are agricultural pests. You know, they're saving farmers millions of dollars a year. Just the U.S. alone, it's about $23 billion. So, for example, if you're a cotton farmer in the Texas Hill Country, they're saving about $750,000 a year in crop damage or pesticides they don't have to deal with because of all the insects these bats are eating.
My great-grandfather was planting orchards about 100 years ago. He was one of the founders of the Texas Pecan Growers Association in 1921.
Wow. John Bird's 1,200 pecan trees are part of the family legacy, but they're also an attraction for insects.
One of my big pests in this orchard is case sparrows. They're a moth. They lay 100 eggs. They can lay 100 eggs at a time, and each one of those eggs makes a little caterpillar that'll go into a pecan nut and kill it. And if all those eggs get into these clusters of pecans, they can kill 100 pecans. And 100 pecans on natives, that's about a pound. And a pound of natives last year was $1.50. So for every moth, that's $1.50 that they eat. And you figure they're out here every night.
Case sparrow moths are one problem, but for John, spraying his trees with pesticide would have just created another one.
I've got 400-year-old trees out here, and they've been doing quite well without chemicals or people. And you know, that they produce pecans, and there's a way of doing it without pesticides. And the more you spray like that, it messes the whole ecosystem up, and then you have real problems that you have to spray more for. But I figure that there's ways that instead of trying to kill things, you can promote life in the orchard, not death. And you know, it costs less to do that. I mean, I know I'm not going to knock them all out, but I can help by promoting the good stuff.
For John, the good stuff means bats, which would eat the case sparrow moths if he could get them to live on his orchard. So he started building bat houses.
Well, I've started off on the smaller ones and put those up, and immediately they were filled. Then I went to the one that was 3 times as big and put it up, and then they were immediately filled. And then later on, I put the big one up here, and it took a while. It was the wrong time of the year, but it got filled.
So how big is big? What are we talking here?
That one 4 by 4 by 4, and it, according to the amount of panels and everything, and it has capacity for about 30,000, but I imagine all that would get in there would be about 20, from what I can tell. And they've done some counts on it.
20,000.
20,000. They did tell what they were eating, and yes, they were eating case sparrows. And they found that by DNA analysis.
And probably thousands of moths per night.
Oh yes, I imagine.
So that's
when they're here. But see, the thing, they hatch, and then you got to have bats right then, and they usually are here during that time. So they're doing a good job. I'm just giving them a good place to live.
Well, the moral of the story is build it and they will come, right?
Build it and they will come.
Good. And that's exactly what I did with a simple kit I ordered online. All the parts come pre-cut and pre-drilled. All the hardware is included, And within 10 minutes of opening the box, I had a starter bat house ready to hang at the garden farm. But building a larger one from scratch cost less than $50 in materials, half a sheet of plywood, and 12 feet of 1x6 lumber. Our DIY guy, Todd Brock, handled the rest. All right, so Todd, you've got this already somewhat assembled, so tell us what we're looking at here and what you're building today.
Yeah, we're going to build a 4-chambered bat house, which basically means there are 4 different compartments in the house for the bats to roost. These dividers are going to create the different compartments. This is just a piece of plywood. We've got these spacers, and that creates each compartment. You can see right there, that's the first compartment right there, and it doesn't look like much, but it's more than enough room for the bats. And then we've got these 1.5-inch holes that we've cut into each of the dividers. These are basically the doors that go from compartment to compartment. The bats will be able to climb up through the house and then access different compartments through these holes based on temperature variations within the house.
Okay.
And that's really it. So 3 dividers with the spacers. Now we've got 4 chambers for the bats. And you'll notice on the dividers, here's the real key, these grooves that we've cut into the plywood.
Right.
The bats are going to need something to grip onto.
Yeah.
Climb around in there. We've done this with a table saw. The blade's set very, very shallow, a 32nd of an inch, a 16th of an inch at most. This is not a deep cut at all. This is very, very shallow. You could do this with a circular saw. You could do this with a hand saw and a straight edge. And I've even seen some plans that say all you need to do is rough it up with some sandpaper. Anything to create that grippy texture. You're basically trying to mimic the interior of a cave.
Now you've stained this, and I assume that's important for a couple reasons. One is to weatherize it, but does it have something to do with temperature control as well?
The color is important, and there are resources online that will tell you what color your bat house should be based on where you live, and it all has to do with summer temperatures. Most of the country, you're looking at a bat house that is black, dark gray, dark brown. The darker the better, and that's for heat absorption and again to mimic a cave. Once we attach the final cover, you'll see that it's a 2-piece front, and it leaves this 1/2-inch channel. This is for ventilation. Ventilation is really important. Then we've also got these 2 channels cut into the side just to keep air circulating throughout the house, which is really important.
Now I know we secure it with nails, but don't we need to sort of weatherize it too with some caulk around the edge?
We're going to caulk everything, but it's really more about light than it is weather. Now while we don't want rain to get in the inside of this box, what we really don't want is sunlight to get in this box. So every place where 2 pieces of wood meet, every place there's a joint, every place there's a seam, that's an opportunity for sunlight to slip into that crack. Again, we're trying to make this as much like a cave as we can. So we're going to take a tube of caulk and seal up everything on the outside to make sure no light gets in there.
Now that was a lot to know, and we're going to have the details on how to build this very kit from Bat Conservation International. It'll be on our website. The website address, it's the same as our show name. It's growingagreenerworld.com, and it'll be under the show notes for this episode, and we'll also have all the other little details that we didn't have the time to cover today. But whether you're building your own DIY kit or buying a kit that's all ready to go, it's a beautiful thing to attract bats to your backyard, and you're going to love it, and it's going to really help your garden too. So Todd, let's get this caulked up and I'll help you mount it.
Yep.
From pollinating to controlling pest populations, to even providing rich fertilizer in the form of their droppings or guano, bats can be a valuable ally for the home gardener if you can attract them to your property. But for all their benefits, there's one thing bats won't do, and this one busts a pretty big bat myth.
Contrary to popular belief, if you put up a bat house in your backyard, you're not going to solve your mosquito problem. That's not why you're putting it up. You will be able to solve some of your other problems with moths and beetles, but bats are not eating that many mosquitoes. They'll eat a few mosquitoes here and there opportunistically, but they're not really a primary source of the bat's diet. They're just too small. When a bat can have a big chunky moth, why would they go after these teeny tiny mosquitoes? It just doesn't make economic sense for them and their metabolism.
And as scientists have continued to learn more about bats, a new threat has been discovered that's suddenly putting huge numbers of them at severe risk.
White nose syndrome is a recently described fungal disease of North American bat species. They call it white nose syndrome because of the fuzzy white material when the fungus is growing on the exposed tissues of bats, which include the snout. You also see visible fungal colonization of ears, wings, feet, any exposed tissue. The pathogen, Pseudogymnoastis destructans, which is shortened to PD typically, is known as a psychrophilic fungus, meaning that it prefers cold temperatures and cannot grow at mammalian body temperature. So when the bats are active and flying around and have elevated body temperatures, they are not susceptible. However, when they go into hibernation and that body temperature is reduced, the fungus begins to colonize them and actually consume their tissues. And so from a wildlife disease standpoint, we're experiencing some of the most precipitous, severe disease-associated declines of wildlife that have ever been recorded. And in some of the worst cases, we've observed over 99% declines in those populations. The good news is there's a number of laboratories across the country that are working on mitigation strategies. We're looking at naturally occurring VOCs that can be used with a nebulizer or atomizer to produce a fine aerosol, volatilize into a gaseous compound, and envelop those organisms, the bats, and repress the growth of the fungus on them while they hibernate. We're working to mitigate declines of the tricolored bat at one site in North Georgia known as Black Diamond Tunnel. One of the tricks to this is that the tunnel, an abandoned railroad tunnel from the 1860s, is flooded. And so we cannot physically go in there with a nebulizer. So we had to develop the infrastructure to mount our nebulizer on a boat and send it in autonomously to distribute these antifungals. Our bats are in fact increasing at this one site for the first time since the arrival of white nose syndrome.
For now, researchers work towards solving the mystery of white nose syndrome. And more of us look for ways to not only live in harmony with bats, but encourage them to play a role in our gardens and on our farms. And we continue to marvel at these incredible creatures in the wild, putting on their nightly shows at places like Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin and Bracken Cave outside San Antonio.
One of the cool things about these bat emergences, they're so dense that they actually show up on Doppler radar like a cloud forming over the cave. So if you're watching if you go to our website, batcon.org, you can see a live Doppler feed and see that cloud forming over the different bat roosts in the hill country. So what you can see behind us is the entrance, the mouth of the cave, and actually you probably can see the bats swirling right there just at the mouth of the cave. So sometime in the next few minutes, these bats are going to move out into the bottom of the sinkhole, and we're literally going to have a batnado, this vortex of bats as they spiral around in the sinkhole, and then get up to treetop level, they'll start streaming away from here.
It's important that we understand why such extreme efforts are warranted in wildlife conservation, and that bats themselves represent a solely unique evolutionary lineage, and one that, within the context of biodiversity, is almost unrivaled. The number of bat species that exist, I believe it's 20% of all known mammalian species are bats. Covers a wide diversity. And when we lose these organisms, we lose something far greater than just the enjoyment of watching them fly out of a cave or catch insects under a street lamp. They represent something very special about life itself on Earth and diversification of life. It warrants extreme efforts and extreme measures to try to conserve these species when they're experiencing such unprecedented declines.
When you hear 20 million bats and you see all the people lined up with their cameras in front of Bracken Cave, you know it's going to be a spectacular sight. But to be here and see it firsthand, that is truly awe-inspiring. It just reminds me of how small we humans are in the grand scheme of things, and how every species is important, and the importance that every animal plays in this healthy ecosystem that we're all a part of. And even those ones that are maybe maligned as sort of a campground nuisance or maybe a Halloween decoration. But to be here and to witness this and see it firsthand, well, I have a whole new appreciation for bats, and it finds me thinking about new ways that I can attract more of them when I get back home at the garden farm. And hopefully, we've inspired a few of you to do the same thing. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Joe Lample, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World.
Growing a Greener World is made possible in part by
We are dreamers, doers, builders, believers, and new pioneers. We are Kubota, proud sponsor of Growing a Greener World.
The 2018 Subaru Crosstrek. Built in a zero landfill plant, so you can roam the earth with a lighter footprint. Subaru, proud sponsor of Growing a Greener World.
and the following: the U.S. Composting Council, Milorganite, and Rainbird.